A Mars mission is probably the most dangerous mission that will have ever been attempted.
Right. Okay.
Because if you think of when they get millions of miles away, there's going to be temporal delays in being able to communicate.
Greetings. I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations. Today, there's a lot of hype about visiting and even colonizing Mars, but it's a bit complicated because our bodies depend on gravity. We're going to get some facts about this from a real expert. Our guest is James Lackner, Professor of Physiology at Brandeis University. Dr. Lackner is an expert on the physical effects of microgravity. He's also the founder of the famous Ashton Graybiel Lab at Brandeis, one of the major labs in the world for devising and testing artificial gravity innovation, such as the largest rotating room in the world, which was featured some time ago on a Nova Now program hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Dr. Lackner, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and to share some of the issues that are going to arise with Mars missions.
Yes.
And some of the advantages that they might also have.
Okay, all right. So if you would start us off, please, with some background about microgravity. Apparently, we depend on gravity, is that correct? And so what happens if we get out in the space station or something?
Well, what happens is suddenly we're in a state of free fall. The reason we're weightless is because we are in the space station and all of its inhabitants are falling around the Earth. And so there are no contact forces on their bodies that are related to giving cues about body orientation with respect to gravity. If you think about it right now, we're sitting and we've got contact cues on our rear ends and on our feet and our arms.
We know left from right.
And the reason we feel body weight is because the floor is supporting our body as it is being accelerated downward by the force of gravity. And that force of gravity is very important on Earth because as soon as you go into a reduced gravity environment, one of the things that happens is there are modifications in bone metabolism and in muscle. Most people don't realize it, but bone is very metabolically active tissue, and bone responds to the force environment. And if you don't need strong bones, your system starts stealing calcium and reduces the strength of bones. So bone integrity is very, very important. And the other thing is, in a weightless environment, your muscles, in terms of their characteristics and response properties, undergo changes. And some of these changes can be long-lasting. And together, all of these types of changes lead to a number of problems during re-entry.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I think you mentioned the visual problem as well. I mean, that the effect on the eyeballs even, but also cardiovascular and stuff. Could you tell us a little bit about that too?
Yes, one of the things that happens in space flight, which is very important, is that there's a headward shift of body fluid, of blood. And when you're in a weightless environment, very quickly you reduce the volume of circulating blood that you have in your body. But at the same time, it turns out that the blood supply to the head doesn't seem to be diminished, but can be, even in terms of pressure, augmented. And there are a number of changes that are taking place, including increases in intracranial pressure that are putting pressure on the back of the eyeball, for example, and changing its conformation so that you end up having trouble with near vision because you're hyperopic. In other words, the image is being focused behind your retina rather than on it. And so that's a concern for long duration missions. And also with the changes in intracranial pressure, there's displacement of the brain itself somewhat within the skull, and there's a greater tendency for increased size of the ventricles of the brain and also pressure being put on certain regions of cortex, all of which are not positive news.
Right. This is interesting because I think in the space station, where people are doing months-long stays there, they emphasize they have to exercise a lot within the space station. Is that correct? To try to keep the muscles
yes,
up?
That's true. And there, about 7 or 8 years ago, were some new developments in terms of exercise equipment for the International Space Station. And those very heavy-duty resistive exercise machines were helping to attenuate the problems with bone. But it's beginning to appear that it may be the case that that exercise also exaggerates the problem of the flattening of the eyeballs.
Yes.
So that makes it less interesting to have heavy-duty exercise equipment, which is very massive on a mission to Mars, because we don't know what we're really getting into.
Right. Before we get these guys back down to Earth here for a minute, ask things like swallowing and so on. Is that different in microgravity, up like on the space station also? Just ordinary, I would say, because everything is sort of pushed up, I think, but does this affect our body processes?
It doesn't seem to be one of the big issues.
Okay, so that's not the thing, but these other issues, they're big. When they come back to Earth, we don't see them running off the spaceship, right? What's happening?
What's happening is, first of all, one thing we haven't mentioned is space motion sickness, which can occur during the first 3 days in orbit, and for some people even longer, and can really disrupt the astronauts' performance. But many of the long-duration returnees are also experiencing sickness on landing, and typically they can't initially stand or locomote. And it takes days, sometimes weeks and months to get toward fuller recovery. And some people can be affected for longer periods.
Right, that's what we've seen, but that is not promulgated quite as much, the long-term effects. And I understand there's some people really do have long-term effects from this is just in the space station, and in the space station, you're in there for months. Now it takes, I don't know, it's a few hours or something to get to the space station, and you still have gravity from Earth, but it's not as bad as greater distance. But then they come back, they have these long-range effects from health that they have mentioned, and There has been a question, I think, about what would happen if you went farther into space for longer periods. And so that's what I want to
Right.
get after. But first of all, could you clarify for us artificial gravity, which you play with a lot, and
Yes.
natural gravity?
Well, really, from Einstein's equivalence principle, which was the basis for his special theory of relativity, he came to the conclusion that for relatively finite regions of space, that you can't distinguish between an inertial linear acceleration and the acceleration of gravity, that no measuring instrument per se would be able to identify a difference between their effects.
From not artificial gravity and gravity?
Yep, he's essentially saying that gravitational acceleration and linear acceleration are equivalent in terms of their actions.
Does that mean that your devices for creating artificial gravity are sufficient for compensating the loss of gravity, being far away?
In principle, yes.
And that would work.
Yes.
So do they use this on the space station?
Not at the present time. And there have been thoughts of rotating space habitats that were developed many years ago, including by Wernher von Braun. And those are all feasible from a construction standpoint and a conceptual standpoint.
Okay, so it would work if you were going to stay on the space station for 2 years or something, because 1 year is bad enough now, but you're saying they don't have a compensating device up there for a gravity machine.
That's right.
Okay, but you'd have to have one if you went to the moon long term, or certainly to Mars.
Well, if you want to be weightless for a long period of time and don't care whether you return to Earth or not, then it wouldn't matter, because you could survive on the moon, for example, with a reduced strength skeleton and reduced muscles.
Oh, because you're a different gravity.
Yeah, the
Right.
problem is return.
Mars also, you could manage without the gravity. I forget what the third of Earth's gravity or something or
Yeah.
others, a little bit, but
The moon gravity is about 1/6 G, about 0.16 of Earth gravity, and Mars is 0.38.
okay. But so if you get there, then you could do without gravity. I want to come back to that. As long you're not going to come back, because it takes 7 months.
Right.
No, about 4 years or something to get there. A long time, 7 months.
That wouldn't be a gravity level that would be adequate to preserve bone and muscle completely. You'd need a higher force level.
Okay.
So you would want to have some adjunct form of delivery of acceleration that would stress bone and muscle.
Okay. And the rest of it, like the eyes and the brain?
If you had a full 1G of artificial gravity, then presumably there wouldn't be any problem with the eyeballs in the first place.
Okay. All right. Now, let's get on the spaceship. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
One issue, of course, is that artificial gravity also has some side effects,
Oh,
and we need to adapt to it.
could you tell us about it?
Well, one of the things that happens if you're in a rotating environment is if you make tilting head movements, you can very quickly elicit symptoms of motion sickness. And it's interesting because if you make the same head movements in weightlessness, they are less stressful if you're rotating. And it's a very complicated story why that took many years to puzzle out, but most people can adapt to 3-4 RPM without revolutions per minute, without much difficulty.
So this is
5.
something spinning,
Yes, spinning.
and you've got to hold your head straight. You can't be moving your head.
Well, you want to be able to live in that environment, to be able to move about, to walk, to
Oh,
cook
this
things.
is the room, the gravity, the
Right.
artificial gravity room.
Right.
You're able to move around.
Right. Our room is designed to be able to run for days or weeks.
Aha. Tell us about it then. Just so we can get up and walk around, and I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And
it's spinning.
it's spinning. And what's interesting is when you first go in and it's spinning, say at 10 RPM, and you make an arm movement, your arm will be deviated by what's known as a Coriolis force. And it'll feel as if some intangible force has deviated your arm. Make 20 reaches like that, and your reach will again be straight and accurate, and you won't feel the Coriolis force anymore. And we wondered, why could that possibly be? And we found out that when you are in everyday life, and say you go into, say it's a hot day, and you go into a beer store and you make a quick reach for grabbing a beer, the peak velocity of your torso creates, when your arm extends, a very, very substantial Coriolis force.
How about that?
Yeah, and you don't know that because your nervous system automatically compensates for it.
However.
Yeah.
In the room, yeah.
If you think about other things, for example, of some strange things about gravity, if we're standing on 2 feet, say I'm weigh 160 or something, if I'm standing, there'll be 80 pounds of force on the bottom of each foot. If I lift 1 foot, there'll be 160 pounds on the stance foot. It doesn't feel like it's changed much.
Right. But in a weightless environment?
There, in a weightless environment, you would just float.
There, that makes that easy.
Yeah.
That's, well, you have an artificial room then.
Yes.
People can move around in this.
Yes.
So this is more like Star Trek than we
Yes.
can, where they're moving around. And it, initially, if I understand you, you can be, what shall I say, disoriented, but
Yes.
you will adapt.
You
will
adapt.
adapt. In this room, we're okay in terms of like the compression problem and so on, as long as we're in that room.
Well, in order to be totally okay with the compression problem, if the room were in space, you'd have to be generating probably 1 G
Okay.
contact force on the walls. See, if you're in a rotating space vehicle,
Right.
that's like a rotating room with walls,
Right.
ceilings. When the thing's spinning, your floor would be the wall. You would walk on the wall, and that would feel as down to you.
So we're
In our
walking on the
room-
wall.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
In our room at 17 RPM, it's as easy to walk on the wall as on the
Okay.
floor.
All right. All right. Can we go to Mars now then?
Sure.
Let's try this out. Now, first, there's a question of distance. Now, in addition to the absence of gravity, or that we're in a microgravity situation on this ship, there's this you can tell us whether we can get up and walk around and so on, but we have radiation also, right? That's another problem.
Well, you have primary galactic radiation, which would be helium and hydrogen ions. You also will have the solar wind of protons and electrons.
Right.
And that can be very, very dangerous.
That's what I thought. I don't know within the space station, but you're doing long distance travel. I think is that about
and
7
there
months
are
to get to.
also meteorites And
Oh, yes, that's
micrometeorites,
it. And they can be very small to
Right.
do a huge
but
damage,
they're
right?
usually concrete or iron, and
Yes, right.
do
And you're
tremendous
moving very
penetration.
rapidly, and
Yes.
it's moving, so there's
Yes.
that danger as well. Right. I wanted to, since we just have a few more minutes left, to get this idea of we're in a spaceship going to Mars. I don't know if this is a different kind of, it has to be like, will it be like Star Wars spaceship? And you'll have your rotating room inside?
Probably
People-
not initially.
Okay. So are people sort of sitting for that length of time?
They'll
Floating,
be able
rather.
to move around, and hopefully they would have some private quarters. A Mars mission is probably the most dangerous mission that
Right.
will have ever been attempted.
Right. Okay.
Because if you think of when they get millions of miles away, there's going to be temporal delays in being able to communicate. There are also, in the course of the space flights we've had already, been a number of issues related to urinary retention,
Oh, that's important.
pneumonia, other things,
Right.
including passing kidney stones.
Right.
And if you're trying to do telesurgery and there's a 4-minute delay, it isn't going to work that well.
Right. That's very important. Things like going wee-wee and so on. But it's a whole different thing, I imagine. But in this time, we are 7 months now in space. We're exposed to a great deal of radiation. There are all
Right.
kinds of huge problems. And then we get to Mars, and what kind of shape are we in if we get to Mars?
Probably reduced,
to
but
put it mildly, okay. But
with exercise techniques, it may be possible to do reasonably well.
Okay.
It's hard to tell.
all right.
But
What-
then you've got a harsh environment there.
Not a fun place, right? Once you get there, and as you said, it takes a long time to communicate. You've got a huge distance there, so you can't just call 911, even to get some information. But once we get there, how long do you think we could actually endure? Let's say we're halfway healthy.
Well, that's all going to depend on, the atmosphere of Mars is a tiny fraction of the atmosphere of Earth.
And no
And
magnetic.
Earth, it's 14.7 psi at surface level. On Mars, it's about 0.9 psi. Your blood boils at about 1 psi.
Even in your spacesuit.
Yeah, that's why 60,000 feet is what's considered the space equivalent altitude from the
I
standpoint of
see.
the circulatory system.
Okay.
So you're going to need spacesuits, and you're going to need, you're going to be able to, with a 95% carbon dioxide atmosphere, you're going to be able, with modern technology, to recover virtually all the oxygen. So that's a plus.
Right.
And you'll be recycling your urine into water, so that's a plus. But you're going to have some habitats that would be, with shielding.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot, because there's no magnetic sphere, or not enough, like
Yeah.
Earth protects the
Yeah.
the atmosphere, and you don't have that there. No, there's no protection for anything. Yeah.
And NASA has really worked very hard on plants, plant biology.
Oh, yes.
And it's clear that you could have things like dandelions and kale for growing pretty well in under Mars conditions inside a plant habitat of some sort.
Right. It almost sometimes it looks almost comical. You know, you're not going to have that hamburger. You're not going to have any fish. You're not, you know, it's
Right.
really very, very complicated, the idea of growing food and stuff. We were concentrating mainly on the physical aspect of this, and I don't know how they would set up a hospital, for example. It sounds
Right.
like you might need one rather quickly. But in any case, to sum up, what's your idea? I mean, in terms of the viability of setting up a colony?
I think it's perfectly viable.
You do?
If you've got $500 billion that you want to spend, you could do a pretty good job.
But you think you could set up the colony, because you're not going to be able to go walkies, you know, anything like that.
Right.
Everything is going to have to be very structured.
It's going to take a long time to build it because of, you know, the construction, but also getting the material there.
Well, getting the material there, and then who's going to construct? Yeah.
My feeling is it's perfectly feasible.
You do. Okay. All right. So, and you're going to create the gravity of innovations that will make it work. Is that it? So you would have on the spaceship, our last question here, on the spaceship just getting there, there would be an artificial gravity device on board. Is that the idea?
There could be. It's not clear whether it'll be on the first mission or not. But there's a fellow named John Zippe who was one of the designers of the International Space Station. And he believes it's perfectly possible to have a rotating vehicle where the whole thing is rotating, and you also have an engine that's a nuclear engine.
Oh, fun. Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, right. I can't wait for that. I remember those stories from even the spaceships. We will be fired by a nuclear
Right.
engine.
Yep.
I think I delay myself. But,
Yep.
but so you do think it is possible in the end, and
Sure.
you want to give a time for it within a decade or 2 decades, or?
Well, for the last, I think for about the last 60 years, there's always been saying in 10 years there will be but
This is a recording, yeah.
Yeah. But I think Elon Musk will do something because he seems
very impatient to get there.
Yeah, he's dead determined to do it.
Yes, right. Well, it will be fun to see, I think. But this has been great information. And Dr. Lackner, thank you very much for this wonderful background. And we will switch off to questions now,
Okay.
if we may. Okay, thank you. And could we start? The first one that we have is this colonizing Mars, is it affordable and is it worth the risk? You did mention some money there.
I don't know. I don't think it would be considered affordable, probably by most countries. I think that the risk, there are people for whom it'll be worth the risk. If you think of Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic for the first time, that he was going for a prize, the Orteig Prize, and all sorts of people died trying to cross the Atlantic in aircraft.
So you think it is possible? It's going to cost a little money. There are people
Yes.
a lot of money.
Well, I think there are a lot of billionaires who are willing to spend big bucks.
This is true. Okay, and following up on that, actually, this is very interesting. What about underground habitation, which seems like that almost has to be? Would that sufficiently shield people from radiation?
That would be very, very helpful.
I mean, I know that people have thought on those
Yeah.
terms, that you'd have to
Yeah.
go underground
Yeah.
to shield them from radiation. So that would be doable,
That would be one way of limiting your overall exposure.
right? And just can we get back up? I mean, so you're going to have to live underground, but you can get up in your spacesuits and walk around on the
Yeah.
surface.
Sure.
Okay, all right. And one more here. If this can happen, how long would it take to build a safe environment for humans on Mars?
Depends on how large the environment is going to be,
Right.
and also how self-sufficient you want it to be in terms
Yeah.
of food and so on.
Right.
But it would take probably a number of years.
Yes, to do that. And you know, what is
And
it?
when I say a number, it might be 10 or 20.
Okay. These, what do they call them? They're habitats to sort of on Earth. They're
Yes.
like a few acres, I think.
Yeah.
And they grow plants, but you're not in zero gravity or microgravity,
Right.
and you're breathing oxygen. Would it be that size? I'm trying to think. Maybe a dozen people, I think, live on those.
Right, they could be that size, and you could have clusters of them.
Clusters.
That's one of the current thoughts and designs that are being bandied about.
Okay, all right. And we're getting the signal that we're out of time. So
Oh.
I'm sorry, but thank you so very much for
Well,
this.
thank you. I had a lot of fun.
It was fun. Yes, thanks. Bye-bye.